Evening, everyone. I'm Ellen Myers. I'm the Programs and Communications Director at the Newton Free Library. I want to thank you all for coming to this webinar on transportation after COVID-19 priorities for moving forward. It's part of the long-standing Green Newton series at the library. Of course, now we've gone virtual. I do hope that you and those you hold dear are doing well in these very, very challenging times. And I also want to let you know that the library has developed a great roster of virtual programs for all ages, and I encourage you to visit newtonfreelibrary.net to find out what program you'll be attending next. Our speakers for this evening are Ann Lusk, who has a Ph.D. and is at the Harvard Chan School of Public Health. Galen Mook is Executive Director of Mass Bike, Massachusetts statewide bicycle advocacy organization. And we have Dina Gorelick, I hope I've pronounced their name correctly, the Newton North High School senior and president of the Newton North Bike Club. The panelists will present ideas on how to accelerate efforts to create transportation that's healthy and active and supports our environmental goals to reduce air pollution. Before they begin, I'd like to introduce Marcia Cooper, president of Green Newton, who will review a few Zoom webinar instructions.
Thank you, Ellen. So for those of you who have dialed in, you will be in listen-only mode, so you will be on mute. If you are seeing the presentation in a very small box, you can click on the upper right corner, Enter Full Screen, to make the screen larger of the slides. When we share a slide, you will see a split screen with the presentation on the left and the speaker on the right. To view the presentation slides larger and speaker smaller, you can drag the vertical bar that's on the right side of the slide over to the right. If you are experiencing any technical difficulties, you can use the raise hand button or the chat function to let us know, and we will try our best to help you out. You can submit questions on the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. Questions will be addressed at the end of the presentation. Green Newton will share a recording of the webinar on our website in a day or two, so no need to take notes, except for one thing that I'm about to tell you. I encourage you to visit Green Newton's website and click on the Take Action tool to learn about specific actions that you can take to reduce your climate impact, including actions that involve transportation. On the Take Action link, you can also make a checklist of actions that you want to accomplish and keep track of actions you completed. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce you to City Councilor Alicia Bowman, who will be moderating tonight's discussion.
Great, thank you so much.
And Alicia will also facilitate the Q&A portion of the program. Thank you, and take it away, Alicia.
So thank you very much to the library for hosting this, and Green Newton for co-sponsoring this, as well as Bike Newton and the League of Women Voters. We have three great panelists tonight, so we're going to start right in with Ann Lusk, who has a Ph.D. in architecture, environment, and behavior, and is a research scientist at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health, where she teaches and conducts research. She has worked on bicycle facilities for over 39 years and received a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Association of Pedestrian and Bicycle Professionals for designing facilities that make all populations feel more comfortable bicycling. Her first project, which she started in 1981, was the creation of the multi-award-winning Stowe Recreation Path in Stowe, Vermont. She lives in Brookline in a 200-year-old cottage she is restoring and has children and grandchildren nearby. Thank you very much, Ann, for joining us tonight.
Thank you. I come to all of you with a heightened sense of urgency because, as all of you do, I just read more emails, and there was a notice from NACTO, the National Association of City and Transportation Officials, and all of us really like NACTO. They've supported cycle tracks from the beginning. But I studied all of their pages in response to COVID, and they had pages for adding restaurants to the streets, adding walking to the streets, adding delivery to the streets, adding bus rapid transit to the streets, closing the streets completely. And I worry that at the end of COVID, what we'll find we have is streets that have restaurants, that have deliveries, that have BRT lanes, and that we have not looked to create cycle tracks. Because if you look at the public health issue, the biking benefit is so tremendous because you're 4 up to 16 mets. And if you're sitting at a restaurant table, you're at 1 met. And if you're eating, then that increases your risk of maybe getting a next pandemic, and certainly heart disease, diabetes, stroke, and cancer. So tonight, the talk is about temporary cycle track routes and route amenities, COVID and climate change. Next slide. The transportation options include driving. Massachusetts has a very small percentage of electric vehicles, EVs, and few homes have EV charging. And before COVID, Massachusetts had congestion and pollution, and we know that that negatively impacted communities such as Chelsea with the Tobin Bridge. We have walking, the distance too far to walk for many people to get to work. We have bus, but the buses increase the risk of contagion. We have bus rapid transit lanes, but these need to be created at guaranteed speed. And then the curbside space has many competitors, such as deliveries, Uber, Lyft, EV charging, parking, and cycle tracks. With the bike, we have temporary cycle tracks, separated bike lanes, and now is the time to design stakeholders' participation and use. The reason I wanted to read all of that is I want you to be assured that next slide. Next slide. We're going to go through in the discussion, not back up.
This one?
But there, we are going to go through in the discussion the topics of driving, walking, bus, and bike. But for now, I want to give you new information about temporary cycle tracks and route amenities that will add to the discussion. I want to ask all of you, can you hear my alarm clock that's going off upstairs?
No.
No? Okay, good, okay. It's fine for me. I didn't want you to have to hear it. And next slide. Next slide, okay. The objective. Because I teach, then this is an academic talk, but it will also be informative for you. So the overall objective is to give you new information so you can decide if you want to have in Newton, if you want to design and locate temporary cycle track routes, and also if you want to incorporate temporary cycle track route amenities. There are no route amenities on the NACTO website, and these are design details that appeal to humans and that motivate them and encourage them to bike. Next slide. The topics that we're going to cover are 4 main themes. I'm going to give you vocabulary words because maybe most of you are familiar with all the vocabulary words about COVID and transportation, but then you'll see all of them in advance. So if I say something, then you'll understand what a closed street is or a shared street. We're going to talk about the cycle track routes, but this is going to be discussed by bike types, biking populations, current bike standards, separators, street lighting, trees, hills, and sightlines. The route amenities, these are the additional features for environment and behavior. Have we given signs or directions to novice bikers? Are there bike-friendly service stations or garages where you can fix your bike? Because we don't have enough bike shops in the Boston area. The bike parking at stores, offices, and homes. If you have EV bikes, they're expensive. You can't lock them up. Are there bathrooms for bicyclists if that trek is long to work, and bicycle signals? And then we're going to talk about stakeholders and next steps and partners. I'm not going to leave you with a, well, you could do this. I want you to be able to do it. Next slide. The descriptions of COVID-related transportation solutions. Next slide. Next slide. There you go. These are temporary cycle tracks for bicyclists. Now you've seen them probably in web pictures. Maybe you've seen them in some of the other communities. You've heard about them in Milan. You've heard about them in Paris, especially in Mexico, in Brazil. It's a temporary lane that is the width of the parking or travel lane. Now, if you look up how far and how wide travel lanes are, they're 7 to 12 feet wide, and these are one way. The bicyclists are going in the same direction as the parallel parked cars, as the moving cars were. And they're safer because they are bike only, one way, and there's space for passing another bicyclists. So only bicyclists would be on this corridor. And on this slide, I want to point out that's a barrel with a bike signal on it, a bicycle sign on it and an arrow. And those are jersey barriers to the side. Next slide. Next slide.
I think it takes, there's a delay,
Yes, you got-
just
yes,
FYI.
yes, yes. These are temporary shared use paths for pedestrians and bicyclists. Now, again, these are same 7 to 12 feet wide because that is the width that is standard for putting in a parking lane. And with COVID, the cars were told you can't park there. Some of them have signs on the parking meter saying you can't park here. So you could sneak between the delineator posts, but then you'd see the sign and you'd realize you couldn't park there. The difference with the cycle track and a shared use path in this parking lane is the cycle track is one way and this is two way. So in the middle slide, you can see there's a pedestrian walking toward the person who would be the bicyclist. And these are less safe because they're shared use and they're two directional. So you might then find that you're biking with an e-bike that goes faster and there's a slower pedestrian, maybe 2 or 3 of them. Maybe they're pushing a baby carriage and they're approaching you in this shared use space. So the shared use paths, which were fine for the COVID lockdown, because they widened the sidewalk, people were not going to work, and you had more width for social distancing. But now that we're moving into the get to work phase, return to work, then we want to have people be able to bicycle. Next slide. There we go. Now, some have talked about putting cafes and restaurant tables on the sidewalk. And I know that Mayor Walsh has talked about this. As I said, I just read the NACTO site and they had restaurants and cafe tables all over the sidewalks, all the way into the streets. Maybe you could do this in the North End on Hanover Street, but not on all streets. What's going to happen and what always happens in a shared space is the pedestrians will move to whatever space that is available. So if the entire sidewalk is full of cafe tables, the pedestrians will move to the adjacent cycle track. And then they'll be walking in 2 directions and you'll be back to that shared space being unsafe. And if a bicyclist hits a pedestrian, the bicyclists typically are banned. If a car driver hits a bicyclist, the car driver is not banned. But in the case of bicyclist, oftentimes they say, well, the bicyclist was there, they were going too fast, they didn't control their bike, and they hurt the pedestrian, and therefore we're letting the sidewalk and then this widened cycle track space be just pedestrian space. So we will have again lost the opportunity to create a temporary cycle track. Next slide. Shared and closed streets. Many of you have seen these pictures, you've heard about these adorable children walking and biking. Many of the parents say it's great because they can then get outside with their kids and they can play near their houses. This was great for during the COVID lockdown because it did give you shared space, it gave you social distancing, it meant that you could go outside if you didn't have access to a yard, and you could, with 5 feet of 6 feet of space, talk to your neighbors. But Portland, Oregon and Oakland have grid streets. So they could eventually use some of these shared or open streets and create them, as is in the Netherlands, a wooner. And then that becomes a cycle track route of sorts in that it becomes like a bike boulevard. The difficulty is the Boston area does not have a grid system. So on our streets that are parallel to our main streets, you are taking on a long circuitous route to finally get to where you're going. And we do want the bicyclists to be able to have a route that is as direct as possible to get from home to work so that their trek is not longer than it needs to be. Next slide. Bus rapid transit. I'm a big fan of bus rapid transit. There have been bus rapid transit lanes built in Boston before COVID. Many bicyclists were happy to have a bus rapid transit lane because it meant it was better than having to fight the parallel parked cars in that space and then having to bike in the road where the buses also were. So it was better than their alternative, but you really shouldn't give some people just something that is better than what they had before. You should find out what is the best solution for them. And the best solution for the bicyclist, remembering we're going to have women, children, seniors, and cargo bikes on these cycle tracks, is to not have a bus rapid transit lane, because that means bus rapid is you want to have a lot of buses and you want them to move fast because you want to have buses without a lot of people on them, run more of them, and make them go as fast as possible. So if you're a slower family biking on the bus rapid transit lane, if you're on a cargo bike, if you're a bunch of bicyclists biking together, you're always looking over your shoulder, and many people can look over their shoulder, but not all bicyclists find it an easy maneuver to hold their handlebars and then look over the shoulder and look back and make sure that their front tire is straight. There are many cities where they have put in cycle tracks beside a bus stop, beside a bus rapid transit lane. That's what New York City did, and that's fine. But I'm not sure we can do that in this temporary creation of facilities that are related to COVID. So an alternative would be to have a cycle track beside the BRT lane or with less traffic. The bus could travel in the roadway and the cyclist could travel on the temporary cycle track. Next slide, please. Electric vehicle recharging. I've done a lot of work on this because we need to have more electric vehicles. As you saw in my first slide, Massachusetts is way behind on getting electric vehicles, and poor Chelsea has all that mobile source air pollution coming down onto the Chelsea area. So if we had more EV charging, then we would have more EVs and we'd have less mobile source air pollution for the cars. The problem is we should not be also putting EV charging on the side of the road where some of our roads is a good location. Then we'd be competing with bus rapid transit and EVs and Ubers parking on the side, and maybe the parklet on the side, and maybe bike parking on the side. So all of those people are competing for that curb space, and I'm making the case for cycle tracks. There are other locations where the EV charging could happen. It could happen in the offices and the universities, and also in people's driveways, in apartment driveways attached to the house, or on a post. So I'm looking at all those design issues so that we encourage EV parking. Thanks. Next slide. The topics covered here are cycle track routes. I want to talk about bike types, biking populations. That's a colleague took that photograph of an older woman biking on a lovely Dutch Oma Fiets bike in the Netherlands. The current bike standards, separator, street lighting is the key. Trees, hills, and sightlines. Next slide. The routes serve a variety of bicyclists and bicycles. I did not include pictures of regular bikes because all of you are very familiar with those. When the first Bach feet came to the US, it was imported into a bike shop in New Hampshire. I immediately called up so that I could go up there and I could ride a Bach feet and see how it felt. The second slide on the top, that's a Fun to Go by Van Ram. They're a bike shop that's from the Netherlands, but they have a shop, Bike On, in Warwick, Rhode Island. I make no money from the Van Ram bikes, but the Dutch are very good at designing a bike, and that has 2 seats side by side with a backrest, with armrest, with even a seat belt. The one side, the person pedalers, the other side, the person can either just sit there, pedal and propel the bike, or if they have Parkinson's, they could be forced to pedal faster, and that lessens their Parkinson's symptoms. I love this bike more than the Worksman cycle because you have 2 sets of handlebars. So both people feel they're in command of riding. It's very stable. It has an e-bike capacity so that you're not having to pedal 2 people and force pedaling. The other photograph on the top I took in Montreal. That's a parent with a child's bike attached to her bike, and she's picking up a child after daycare. The bottom is a picture on the left of my son took for me of the cycle track in New York City. And that's a parent with a child biking on a cycle track. So imagine in both of those, all of those pictures, those bicyclists being on the bus rapid transit lane with multiple buses. In the middle is the early Christiania bike from the Netherlands or Denmark. That was just a box. It has 2 wheels in the front. And then the final slide then is of a cargo bike. And all of us have all the trucks pull up on our streets. That's where the pull-up has to happen. The truck stops the traffic. Well, imagine if we had wide enough cycle tracks that we could have all of these bicyclists on the cycle tracks. And we could work to keep the seniors at home. So they're aging in place, and they're all able to bike to get to the grocery store, get to the post office, and to visit friends. So they're not isolated because they have a way to get around. And there's also an easy rider bike that is similar to the Fun to Go that is just 1 seat. Next slide. E-bikes are coming. We saw scooters are coming, and they're here, but the e-bikes are coming because you still have to pedal, but it's just easier. You don't perspire as much. If you have to go uphill, you have an easier time getting up a hill. If you have long distance, if it's the end of the day, you have an easier time. The issue is when we have an e-bike rider and they're able to go a bit faster, they're not going to be be happy being behind a slower bicyclist on a 5-foot wide cycle track. The NACDO and the AASHTO bike guidelines recommend that a cycle track be 5 feet wide, and 5 feet is not wide enough. The senior-friendly Dutch Fun to Go bike is 44 inches wide compared to the width of an average bike of 24 inches. The 24 inches is fine with shy space on both sides of the 5-foot wide cycle track, but you need it to be wider. So the study in Denmark recommended that cycle tracks be 8 feet wide to allow for e-bikes and wider bikes to pass. So much of what I say is not original. I just looked at the answers in the Netherlands. The Dutch don't have bus rapid transit lanes shared with the bicyclists. They have wide cycle tracks. Next slide. 2, cycle track routes. The movable separators to widen the cycle track as demand increases. Now these dividers can include cones, as on the left, barrels, or jersey barriers. And while I was putting this slide presentation together, I was reminded of what is called a zipper lane. I'm going to do this with my hand. A zipper lane is where a truck comes along and it takes the jersey barriers, it kind of goes, and it moves the jersey barriers over. So all of the commuting traffic can come in the morning, and then at night it goes, and it moves all the jersey barriers over to the left. And then I looked at the cones and I thought, okay, what if we got the residents out at 7 o'clock in the morning and they all picked up the cones and they moved them over to widen that cycle track on that side. And then at night, they all moved them back to widen the cycle track on the other side for the traffic coming and going. And then I thought, no, it won't work because somebody will oversleep that morning. But at least I was trying to think creatively. Is there some way that we could think out of the box about this? I don't think so. But at least we have a way that what we're putting in is temporary. If we want to move the cones out, move them back, move the barrels in or out, or even move the jersey barriers in or out, by the way, those are ones filled with water, we can do it. These can be moved. I'm repeating again, this is temporary, this is pilot. And these cones, barrels, and jersey barriers show how pilot it is. Next slide. The routes selected for lighting. I found this on Google Street View when I was looking at all the cycle tracks in the Boston area. And I sensed the frustration of that Google Street driver who was having to take the images that we now all study on Google Street View because he was losing his sunlight. Well, I loved the fact that he was losing his sunlight because it was a street that I could capture street lighting on and get it on Google Street View. So this is a picture of Western Avenue. And you can see now for me that street light is a little bit high, but there are the 2 or lower pedestrian scale lights. We really should be creating cycle tracks that have lighting. And we also have a complement of the trees so that the trees then don't hide the light from the lighting. But for now, for our temporary cycle track routes, we want to make sure that we're able to put people on the streets that have street lighting. Because especially if a woman or a more vulnerable person, the senior is biking back at night and it's dark and it's late, they should have lighting. They should feel safe. They should not be on a dark street by themselves. Next slide. It's going to be hot this summer. We keep hearing how it's going to be hot. We're thankful that it's been as cool as it has been for the spring, but now the leaves are in full leaf, and ideally it would be best if we could bike in the shade. Now, a bike advocate who had not liked cycle tracks, when I was out doing a survey on the Southwest corridor, that's the photograph on the right, on my left, then he said that no, he wanted to bike on the Southwest corridor and not on the adjacent street where all the traffic was. And of course, the Southwest corridor was much nicer simply because it was shaded. The other one is a street in Sydney. It's Bourke Street, and it has a beautiful canopy over the street. So try to see if you can the streets that have some shade, because that heat island from the pavement is going to make the route that much hotter. And even though workers are going to work early in the morning and coming back late at night, that concrete holds the heat. So look for the trees on the streets. Next slide. Routes selected with fewer hills and good sight lines. This is where you're going to rely on your hardcore bikers because they're going to know your hills and your sight lines. You want to have the flattest route possible through Newton. And you want to have good sight lines because that's preferred and the safest. Because remember, not all bicyclists are the same. So your hardcore bikers, they love hills. They love getting their heart rate up. They love to see the cadence to get up the hill. How long does it take them? Are they standing up on their pedals? What's their speed? But for the others who maybe have a Dutch Oma Fiets bike, and they've got groceries on the front, and the bike is heavy, it's got a chain guard cover, it's got a kickstand, it's got a bike rack on the back. It's a heavy bike. So they're having to pedal not only themselves, but they're having to carry that weight by pedaling. And women have less leg strength than men. They get through intersections more slowly. So think about them when you're thinking about hills and also sightlines. Next slide. Now, route amenities. These are the signs, directions, distances, shops, bike-friendly stores, garages, parking stores, offices, homes, bathrooms for bicyclists, and bicycle signals. This is where you can have some fun and be really creative in Newton. Next slide. Signs, stencils, etc., to inform novice bicyclists. All of us have been on a bike route when we're a tourist and we sort of don't know where we're going. We might have a bike map, we might have an app, it's going to help us get there. It's hard to look at the smartphone while we're biking, it's hard to look at the map while we're biking, but it's so simple. And I'm even stressing that it can be as simple as the temporary signs that were put out in Brookline to say, don't push the crosswalk button. It's just a piece of paper with plastic. That machine puts the plastic on the outside of the paper, and then there's a plastic around the post. Well, imagine being able to stop and read that sign to know, okay, if you go in this direction, this is how far it is to get to the grocery store. It's this direction, it's this far to get to downtown Boston. It's this far to get to a water fountain. All of those are elements that are going to assure the novice bicyclist that they're not lost, that they're on the right route, and that they know the direction they're going in. Now, the one sign up there, that's from Erlangen, Germany. You can see all the little bicycle symbols on it. It's telling the bicyclist the directions and the locations. So it's not just a street sign or a direction sign for a driver. It's specifically for the bicyclist. And I've noticed in the US, there have also been instances, we even did this as a pilot on the Minuteman Trail, where you put a stencil on the asphalt. And you can, because I'd done this for Safe Routes to School, put a stencil in with temporary paint. So it only lasts a year, maybe even less than that with the rain. And it does show the direction so that the bicyclists are assured every single time. So any of you have had to drive on a detour. I drove one night coming, because I used to drive the drive between Stowe, Vermont and Ann Arbor to get my Ph.D. And I was late at night in Detroit, low on gas, and I had to take a detour. And I was so calmed every time I saw another detour sign, turn here left, turn here right, because that meant that I knew I was still on the detour route. So those are the assurances you're giving to the novice bicyclist. Next slide. Bike-friendly gas stations. I had come up with this idea for Vermont routes a long time ago, because in Vermont, we don't have a lot of bike shops. So you have to take your bike that's broken, put it in your car, and drive to the bike shop. Well, if the bicyclists in the Boston area don't have a car, they can't get their broken bike to the bike shop. And we also know that gas stations are going to be suffering because people are just not going to buy as much gas. So these two ideas, one did come out of Portland, and that was to put the bike tools and the bike pump at a gas station. So you'd pull into the gas station and you say, okay, I know how to get air, and I hear some tools that I can use. This is great, especially for nighttime, though you could use the machine if you've got enough quarters. The other one came from Bosnia, and they have signs that say bike-friendly service station out front of the gas station. And all that you would need to do in Newton, the Boston area, is just ask some of the gas stations along a main cycle track route, would one of your mechanics learn about bike repair and have a small side workbench set up with some tools, with some tubes, with some lubricant, etc., so that they could fix some of the bicyclist bikes that come in that might be slightly broken. A major repair goes to a bike shop, but there could be modest repairs. And I know Galen could talk much more fully to that topic than I could. But the gas stations, they could certainly help. And somebody like Galen could easily, probably readily teach one of their mechanics in a bike shop and maybe hold a whole class for all the bike mechanics in all the gas stations in all the whole Boston area. That's wishful thinking, but I'm hopeful. Next slide. Bike parking at stores. We know that the bike racks were in the parking spaces, but we don't want them there because we want the cycle track to be for the bicyclists. So how do we get the bike parking near the store front, lining up near the store front? And there's one example, but that's with the permanent rack in the ground. So if this is temporary, what do we do that's more similar to the cones and the the barrels and the Jersey barriers that are filled with water. We could put those big movable racks, maybe if they're angled and the bike's in sideways, not this way, and put those close up to the store so that people could park their bikes there. But we cannot have bike parking where you have to hook your bike up on a hook on the wall, because the females can't lift that heavy bike, and even the father, if it's got a bike trailer on the back, if it's a box feet on the back. So the bikes have to be level on the ground. Next slide. This is really novel. Bear with me. I had taken these photographs by putting a basket on the front of my bike. And then I did ask a nice man in the market near my house in Brookline if he would mind standing there with the produce in the basket. I confess I did put produce in the basket. I didn't put junk food in the basket because I work at the Chan School of Public Health. So he showed how you could put the food in the basket. And he also showed, because we took the bike through the checkout line at the small grocery store. And the grocery store owner was very willing to let me have the photographs taken inside the store. I have grandchildren, so the child carts that are pretend cars that are at Home Depot and the grocery stores, I've taken a tape measure and I've measured the square footage of those, and those are bigger in volume compared to a bicycle. And yet those are wheeled throughout all the aisles in the grocery stores. Now we know that we're fearful of going to the grocery store because everybody else has been holding onto the handle on the grocery cart. So imagine instead if you were allowed to wheel your own bike in, which you have been holding onto, put your groceries in your basket, in your pannier, go through the aisle, and then check out and then go home. You wouldn't have had to touch a cart, and you would have been safer and been able to use your own cart as your bicycle. Next slide. Adjacent residents or shop owners as bike counters. This again is another novel idea. I haven't seen this one. We know in the Boston area, we've had plenty of volunteers volunteer to go out annually and do bike counts at certain locations. That's great, but that's a one-time-a-year bike count for a certain number of hours. We know that there are eco counters, but those are expensive. We can maybe have one of those in a city. So this idea is on these temporary bike routes, we have temporary bike counters, and they volunteer every Thursday of every week from 8:15 to 8:30 to go out and look on the side of the road and count the bicyclists. If their front window in their kitchen is near the street, they can sit and have their coffee by the window and count the bicyclists. If there's a local store, they could have the store owner count. Maybe the store owner could even ask somebody sitting near the window drinking your coffee, would you mind counting bikes from 8:15 until 8:30? And I'm sure that person would be happy to volunteer the task. Maybe you'd even get people into the coffee shop to do the bike counting for you. That would be longitudinal data, and that would be our bike data to show how successful these cycle tracks are. Next slide. Bathrooms. When I was studying the East Bay Trail in Rhode Island, I noticed especially the men were going into the grocery store, big grocery store beside the East Bay Trail. And I thought it was unique because they'd come out and they never had any groceries. And then more men would go in, go to the grocery store, and then come back out and get back on their bike and go in. And then finally I went into the grocery store and I saw that the grocery store had a beautiful public bathroom right inside the grocery store. So all the men biking long distance on the East Bay Trail were able to use that bathroom. I don't know if we want to put portalets up, but I'm just saying that's an option. In Oregon, they also had put up bike-friendly stores, so you knew you could go in there, you didn't have to buy something, you could use the bathroom. It was a store that was supportive of biking. And you could also identify all your public bathrooms, such as your library in Newton. Next slide. Bicycle signals. This is my favorite. This is a bicycle signal that I photographed when I was in China. I like it because it's even more informative than our pedestrian signals because it's red and green. So as a bicyclist, you're sitting there looking at the red bicycle, looking at the red countdown number, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Then you're like a horse out of a gate because you know, oh, it's going to be my turn next, pedal up in your saddle, and you're like a horse out of a gate. And you know how much time you have to get across the intersection because you can see the green countdown number over you as you're biking through, as you do with the pedestrian signal. So we could eventually put these in. We could identify the intersections where we'd like them, but it's an option we could try. Next slide. Stakeholders, the final steps. Next slide. Hold a meeting. Hold a meeting after this meeting. gather as many people as you can. If it's 2 or 3, fine. You can go through this PowerPoint and all of these slides, and you can decide next steps. Make sure you're serving a variety of biking populations, but you have a next step, and that is to hold a meeting and just go through these slides and the slides of the others. Next slide. Hardcore bikers, that's Galen, that's the others. Rely on them because they know a lot. Many of them are even probably members of Strava, so they can do the Strava global heat map, and they can pull up the most frequented routes of going through Newton, so you can start with that data and with their helpful information about hills and wind and sunlight in your eyes and sight lines and most direct routes and difficult intersections. They know a lot, so rely on them. Next slide. Map. You can look at the maps of Newton and put stars on the bike entrances of where the bicyclists are coming into Newton, put stars on the bike exits where bicyclists are going out of Newton, and then also put stars on other destinations within Newton, and then eventually put lines in between the stars to help you also identify the routes. For mapping all the cycle tracks and the shared use paths, the greenways all across the US, I used a similar system by having people put stickers on a map, and this was the Minuteman Trail with lots of stickers on it that people identified. Next slide. Now, assess stores and gas station owners' willingness. Go to the gas station owners. You're going to bring business into them, even though everybody might not buy something. Most people will buy something. And then label that as bike friendly. I don't think a business or a gas station would be unhappy to be labeled bike friendly after COVID and with climate change. Next slide. Bike parking. With all of this movement for having more bicyclists, with the e-bikes, we're going to want to have bike parking inside people's homes, inside their offices, not a bike rack outside. Don't insist that they leave their bike in the snow or the rain, and also bike parking inside schools. Space could be found. For decades, we have found space to park cars inside. We should be able to find space to park the skinny bike inside. Next slide. What's the big picture? Next slide. The public participation process in the US and even the Complete Streets documents have not guaranteed that communities are able to build cycle tracks. Based on what we've learned from COVID, now everybody benefits greatly from science, and everything is supposed to be about science. So consider this new model. Follow what the science indicates is the best solution. And for me, study after study has said cycle track is the safest and the most preferred facility. Pilot. We're not saying build it permanently, but pilot. Test the pilot, retest it, and then also collect data. The science, again, indicates that cycle tracks are safest, and also it's the most preferred for reducing crashes and for COVID risk, and well, reducing crashes. The communities can help develop a new transportation policy and process that's not the public participation process. It's not the Complete Street guidelines, because the lower income, underserved populations don't write Complete Street guidelines, so they can't get the cycle tracks. And they also don't attend evening meetings about putting in a cycle track. We're going to change a policy in addition to putting in the cycle tracks, because everybody will be able to come back and watch Newton and see how you've done it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Anne, for that great talk. I know we have some questions, but what we're going to do is we're going to go through all 3 presenters, and then we'll answer the questions at the end. It's very, some great examples there. Next up, we're going to hear from Dina Gorlick, who's going to talk about the specific challenges of students getting to school via bike. Dina is a senior at Newton North High School, where she is an officer of the bike club. She's been involved with bike advocacy for the past 3 years and has worked with Bike Newton and Mass Bike to encourage more students to bike and to advocate for safer streets. Dina is also a climate activist. She helped organize 2 climate strikes in Newton and is a member of the Newton North Climate Advocacy Club. She'll be attending Brandeis University in the fall. And Dina, are you unmuted?
Yep.
Okay, great. So you're ready to present.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me. This is really exciting. So I'll be looking, as Alicia said, I am a senior at Newton North High School. So I'll be looking at biking to school, specifically my experience, from my experience biking through North. So my first we're talking about transportation in COVID and beyond COVID. But let's first take a look at how students have been getting to school before the pandemic to see how we can use that information to move forward. So the first thing is, what are barriers to students biking? Number one is a lot of students don't feel safe along major streets to school. I know, and people have shared with me, that they would like to bike to school and they would like to bike around Newton, but they don't feel safe. And two components of that are that there is a lack of appropriate infrastructure for cyclists in Newton, and students don't feel comfortable in their abilities, and they don't feel comfortable biking on the streets because they don't see infrastructure that supports them and that supports cyclists. Next slide. Number two is that the traffic right around Newton North and all schools, but from my experience from Newton North, causes a lot of issues. So the problem intersections that I see are intersections with Washington Street, like Lowell and Walnut, and then also Lowell and Elm. There are a lot of people that are all trying to get to the same place via a lot of different modes of transportation. So we have parents driving their kids to school, we have students walking, we have students biking, we have school buses, and it creates a big bottleneck right now, and they're very it seems kind of like a recipe for disaster, and I feel like we're really lucky that there haven't been any major collisions near North recently. And something to consider in the fall when students go back to school is that we think there's going to be a major increase in students being driven or students driving to school, so that will only increase traffic around the schools and make it even more unsafe and make more students feel uncomfortable biking and walking to school. Next slide. And so weather is another barrier to students biking. It's not something I think that's super relevant, but it is something to consider. It's an unavoidable reality of where we live in New England. But I can just say anecdotally that the number of students who bike to school significantly decrease when it rains and during the winter. So we can't really control the weather, but we can control how we adapt to it. Next slide. How can the city address these concerns? So I'll be touching on some points that Ann Lusk already brought up, but I'll just highlight them again. Next slide. So number one would be to adopt low-cost changes along key routes. So that's specifically creating pilot cycle tracks like Ann Lusk was mentioning, using cones and barriers to create a separated cycle tracks on streets such as Watertown Street or Washington Street, where a lot of students use, and also other bike commuters use to get to school and to work. And another option would be looking at creating shared streets that are closed to cars, just to create at least some sort, to have some part of your route that is relatively car-free. I know there's a lot of discussion about doing that in Newton, and that our neighboring communities such as Brookline and Boston have already started to do that. So it'd be really great to see something like that in Newton. Next slide. Another thing that the city could do would be to actually invest in separated and protected bike lanes. Newton, to my knowledge, Newton does not have a single protected bike lane, which is, yeah, not yet. Which is really a major deterrent in students and people who don't necessarily feel comfortable biking on the streets. It really deters them from biking. This is a way to make a lot of people more comfortable biking on the streets, which would encourage more people to bike, more people to get exercise and be healthy, and just have another way to get around the city. The ideal would be to create a connected network of separated and protected bike lanes, so that students and commuters and people biking feel safe on their entire route. And the next slide. And then something else would be to promote bike amenities. This fall, both Newton North and Newton South got covered bike racks, which is really exciting. This was a project that the Bike Newton and other groups have been working on for several years. And it's really exciting that this finally happened. Having a covered bike rack just means that your experience biking to school and leaving your bike at school is a little more pleasant. You know that you're not gonna have a really wet ride back from school to your house. And something else that the city could consider is just putting up more bike racks around the city to make biking more convenient and just more enjoyable. So like if you're biking to meet up with your friends, you know that you can just leave your bike on a rack and you don't have to go around like looking for a safe place to lock up your bike. Next slide. And what actions can students individually take to be to feel more confident biking to school? So I would say the biggest thing would be to learn the rules of the road and some bike basics. That can really help students gain confidence in their skills, and if they are a little hesitant to bike on major roads, if they know the rules of the road and they know the rules surrounding bikes and vehicles, that's a way to make students feel safer biking. Next slide. Another option would be to ride with other students. Riding in a group is more fun, and it is another way to feel safer. I know the school transportation steering group and other groups are looking at organizing bike trains this summer and helping students navigate, helping students find groups of people to ride with, and to lay out some concrete routes that a lot of students can take together. Next slide. And then just something to keep in mind for all students and anyone who would like to start biking more regularly and make it a part of their habits would be to be ready to change some habits and be ready to experiment and adapt to figure out what works best for you. So something like investing in rain pants or getting a milk crate on the back of your bike to carry your stuff is a way to make biking to school more enjoyable, more convenient, and more just easier. So just experimenting and adapting to that is another way that students can feel more confident biking to school. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Dina. That was a great presentation. And that picture of Tour de Newton, it's so sad when we had to cancel Tour de Newton, which would have been taking place in a month. That's events like this are a great way to show people that they can ride around. And I hope we make a lot of progress on students biking to school. So next up, we have Galen Luke. So Galen is the executive director of Mass Bike, Massachusetts statewide bicycle advocacy organization. And though he works a lot on broad regional issues such as bike policies, legislation, funding concerns, education, and more, Galen especially enjoys teaching folks some of the basics of biking to break down barriers and to get more folks riding more bikes more often. Before taking the helm at Mass Bike, Galen worked at Landry's Bicycles in the advocacy and marketing department for 5 years and helped start up the Hubway Bike Share Company for the first 3 years of the program, now known as Blue Bikes, which is coming to Newton. We're so excited. And founded a community bike co-op nonprofit in Alston called Common Wheels, and kickstarted the bicycle advocacy movement during his college years at Boston University, and has worked as a pedicabber and a bicycle activist in the Boston area for over a decade. He is currently working out of his home in Alston and taking distant and distance rides every so often to keep sane. Thank you so much, Galen. Are you unmuted?
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you, Alicia.
Okay.
And thanks everybody who's sticking around. I'll try to make my presentation pretty brief. I'm a little concerned about the formatting, so I hope that text will flow through, but otherwise I can just talk through the slides anyway.
Okay.
And of course, thanks to Bike Newton, thanks to Green Newton, thanks to League of Women Voters. Keep it up, go get them. Thanks to the library for hosting us. So I really appreciate the forum to be able to discuss this. We heard from Anne some really poignant and really pointed tips and tricks very on the specific of examples of what to look for of how to actually make yourself and your town more in the city more bike friendly. And then we heard from Dina, who has some firsthand experience in how it means to actually be a rider in the conditions out there. My presentation will be slightly higher level. We'll actually include some of the similar images and this little bit of similar discussion that we've already heard, but hopefully I can approach it from kind of a more generic conversational point to really start to get those brain juices flowing. And this is designed to be a kind of a food for thought presentation. All right, Alicia, if you would. Okay, cool. Yeah, I think the text is going to be funky, so that's fine. We'll make it fly. We're going to talk today about how communities can build healthier transportation systems, and then how individuals can also build a healthier transportation system. All right, please. So what can cities and towns, what we're seeing happen out there in the time of COVID, it's been pretty innovative because everybody's kind of making this up on the fly. So I'll go through what I have identified as kind of a 5-phase. So far, it's been 3 phases implemented, and phase 4 and phase 5 are actually starting to emerge, but we'll talk each of these phases through. Go ahead, please. So the first phase was what DCR, the Department of Conservation and Recreation, first did, the first onset of COVID, which was essentially close down a lot of their parking, specifically at the state beaches, to prevent a crowd from gathering. They did not want to induce demand, especially when we were really figuring out how much space was necessary and really what the conversation needs to be about separation out there. But they did not close the parks themselves because they definitely realized that recreation is basic human right out there. These are public lands, and not just for mental health, but for physical health as well. It's necessary to get out into fresh air. So what we saw were kind of a low lift, some of the roadways that are parkways, DCR owned, state owned, not even municipally owned, but they went ahead with working with the municipalities, specifically in Watertown and in Boston and the coastal towns, to kind of implement open streets and keep the parks open for personal use, but limiting cars. And what we saw was a big influx of people being able to use the space. And by removing some space that would have been allocated for car storage, we actually open up, essentially, you can see in the slide here with the barrels, you get almost a protected bike lane, which allows for physical distancing so that you're not crowding with joggers and bikers on the same pathway. All right, Alicia, please. What we're seeing with phase 2, specifically in Brookline, and Anne talked about this and used the exact same photo as well, was that specifically in Brookline, they voted to open up spaces around business districts, specifically around grocery stores and pharmacies and routes to the Longwood Medical Area. This took place about 2 weeks into our shutdowns. And they specifically voted not to open up spaces around parks because they didn't want to make a crowding concern. And there were concerns of induced demand and overflow of traffic into local streets, which have not been manifested and not materialized. So we're seeing those concerns actually not happen, which is also nice. And they're continuing to reassess. And my hunch is that Brookline is going to open up more and more as the businesses start to open up. What we're going to see is more street space and road space being used for people and not cars, because really that's going to be what rejuvenates the economy. All right, if you would, please. Thank you, Alicia. Phase 3 is what we're seeing start just last week in places like Malden. Somerville is starting on Friday. Arlington just started today, what both Dina and Anne were talking about, which were essentially these slow streets and open streets in a neighborhood. Neighborways is the kind of branding and the advocates who are kind of on consultant who are doing this the best, in my opinion. But it's very much low cost, DIY. It's got buy-in from the community, and this is designed not necessarily for pure recreation and not for businesses, but this is more of a pressure valve. People are cooped up out there. The parks are closed, So what are people going to do, especially if this goes on for months, or maybe even we see a spike again and we have to kind of close back up? What can we do to make it so that people have space and not cars? It really is a people-driven move. The beauty of this is that there's going to be a how-to guides that come out of the lessons that we're learning. So, you know, in Spike 1, we're seeing different tactics being implemented. We're actually going to be able to build a guidebook, which will then be able to be implemented, and be able to almost choose through a series of menu options so that it fits your community the best. And this is where I think phase 3 is the most exciting for me, because this is actually where local residents can actually act on their own. Now, the challenge here will be to make sure that we're empowering residents to know that this is happening, and different communities are facing different challenges right now. So, you know, what's the biggest fire in Chelsea to put out might not be the same biggest fire in Newton to put out. So just keeping that in mind is that the advocacy move is to be able to present these options as feasible and maybe help people through an application process, or maybe a grant process, or other ways that Mass Bike and other advocates can actually support locals in doing this. All right, please. Thanks, Felicia. Phase 4, which I'm assuming is in the very near future, is what we're going to see economic recovery with the reclaiming of street spaces here. A couple of examples of what we're seeing with parklets, or just taking some pavement and really bringing it back for economic purposes. Now, both of these examples are not COVID related. These are all pre-COVID, but the same tactics can apply for now, when we're really focused on creating physical distancing, physical space for distancing, but yet still allowing curbside retail to take place. What we heard this week was that the governor is opening up in phases. Phase 1, of course, is just curbside retail. Phase 2 is a big question mark, and even that, like, showrooms won't even be open, and you're not really going to be able to put people inside of locations. So this is almost something to really plan for, to really reignite the economic driver of our downtown main streets. I'm thinking of Newton Center, I'm thinking of Beacon Street, I'm thinking of Commonwealth Avenue, where there are businesses that need to kind of roll out onto the street space. But incredibly important here is that this needs to flow in with a network. So even though we may encourage businesses to expand out, which may require zoning or policy changes, we're still going to need to really be hyper vigilant that it does not impede a network, because people are still going to be needing to get to and through business districts through protected bicycle infrastructure. So as phase 4 starts to being rolled out, it should happen in conjunction with kind of a network plan, and they should not preclude each other. They can really go part and parcel. All right, go for it, please. One more, please, Alicia.
Yes.
Thank you. You are a great host, by the way.
Yeah, thank you.
And phase 5, which Anne was really kind of alluding to in terms of where the biggest needs are, she mentioned the hardcore bikers, which I'm not necessarily the hardest of hardcore bikers. My preferred ride is along the Blue Heron pathway because it is flat. But I will say that you can utilize local advocates to find out where the needs are. I'll point out a couple of needs that we should focus on front and center is around elderly communities. They are obviously the most impacted right now. And again, this is for physical and mental wellness. We need to create enough distancing so that folks who feel scared to be around other people have space to be separated from other people, but aren't cloistered and felt that they're trapped in their homes. So it's incredibly important that the Age Strong conversation, that the Healthy Aging Commission, that the Healthy Aging Network plans are really incorporated in with the open space conversation and the open streets conversation. We can also seek the desire lines, which is where some of the advocates can come in. Strava, again, I'll rehash what Anne mentioned, exactly the same photograph. You can utilize these heat maps, and what these are is people who turn on Strava on their phones or on their watches when they take a ride, and you'll have the density of ridership will mean a stronger desire line. You should also think about where you're getting to and through the business districts. So it's incredibly important to understand that the destinations are not just for recreation, but this is an economic generator. And we do want to maintain that people are going to be staying local, especially if we're going to discourage driving in a number of ways. But we got to make sure that we're also connecting to open space too. So I'm really excited about phase 5 being a start of the conversation, because what we need to do as a city is that Newton needs to decide who are the most affected, where are they coming from, and that could also be essential workers working with the SEIU and other unions to find out where janitorial staff, not just the nurses and the doctors are coming from, but the people who are out there making sure that our day-to-day is taking place. Where are they coming from? And it might be connections into the neighborhoods as well as to the business districts. All right, please, Alicia, one more. So that's the 5 phases of what we're seeing in communities. And those were examples of what we're seeing kind of happen in real time, changing day by day, week by week, hour by hour even. And a lot of it is based off the guidelines that we're seeing. But because there are 351 municipalities in the state, that means there's 351 ways of approaching this conversation. So a couple of examples, you know, from Brookline to Somerville to Boston to Watertown to Newton, they're all going to be approaching this differently. So I encourage you, what you're doing, but to have the local conversation. All right. So what can individuals be doing and what we're seeing happen? Go for it, Alicia. One more, please. Well, I'm just going to point out that I've heard a great phrase last week where, you know, a lot of people are saying they can't wait to get back to the normal. Well, to be honest, normal actually wasn't that good for a lot of us. So we really need to be thinking about the new normal. We don't want to go back to the worst congestion. We don't want to go back to 40% of greenhouse gas emissions coming from the transportation sector. We don't want to go back to fatalities on our streets. So we need to make sure that as we rebuild and as we recover, we're laying the groundwork to change what was wrong with the old normal and build a new normal that is better than the old normal. This is for Dina's generation. This is for my generation. This is for everybody's generation. Because if we go back to the old, we're going to be mired in the same problems. I don't want to rehash how terrible it is to be stuck in traffic, to waste 198 hours a year or whatever it might be that the study's been coming out with. And we're done with ghost bike ceremonies. So let's really focus on making it safe and making it, you know, not destroying the planet as we go about our daily life. All right, thanks, Alicia. So a couple of examples of what we're looking at. Bicycles actually can play a major role. I took 2 examples of recovery that was done by bicycles. One is from Hurricane Sandy. On the left, this is in downtown New York City, which, you know, from 52nd Street on down to the Bowery was out of power. So what was happening in New York was we were seeing activists come out, and what those people are doing, they're actually pedaling a tandem bicycle that is attached to a stationary trainer that is charging a battery that can then go and charge people's cell phones. So we're seeing innovation and mutual aid be able to be done with the bicycle. We can all agree, and I'm sure all of us on this panel still are a believer that the bicycle is the most efficient and beautiful and most effective machine ever created by man. And it really does come in handy, especially in crises. Sandy was a different type of crisis, of course, than what we're seeing right now. But, you know, the crises of our climate is really a day-to-day problem. The crises of our congestion is a day-to-day problem, and the aggravation and the lack of outdoor space, the obesity epidemic, diabetes epidemic, all of these are serious, serious issues that can be tackled. And one little perk that I'll mention that's happening right now in COVID recovery is something called Bike Match. This is also an example from NYC, but that's actually happening here in Boston and Allston, and then in Roxbury. Bikes Not Bombs is a big proponent of this, and Common Wheels Bike Co-op is a big proponent of this. But they're actually taking donated bikes, finding essential workers who are riding their bikes to work, and giving free bikes to essential workers, because transit ridership right now is scary at best until we really get our transit practices down. Bicycles can be, again, a pressure valve to really get people to work. So Bike Match is a great mutual aid tool. I can talk a little bit more about some of the other things that are happening out there, but these are just 2 examples of the way that bikes can play a role, specifically in matching people to people. All right, Alicia, please. All right, so what is keeping us from achieving the dreams that we really want to see? I really like this slide. This is kind of an overused slide. It's very general. This is from a nationwide study done by the League of American Bicyclists, which, you know, may or may not have, you know, too much hold in Newton, but we can all imagine what this slide is trying to really tell us. There are 4 general types of riders. There's those who will ride, the strong and the fearless, the 1% who ride in Dina's slide of the snowstorm, or will ride on Washington Street, which arguably I don't either. Again, I like the Blue Heron pathway. And then there's the 7% that are the enthused and confident. Those are the ones who'll turn out to Bike to Work Day. Those are the ones who'll do the bike convoys. Then there are the 60% who are interested but concerned, which I like to think that the Bike Newton ride from all the villages down to City Hall and back really attracts that 60% who are just gung-ho and they just need that extra push. And that's our target. We really want to approach the 60% and find out why they're not riding and help them get over the barriers. And we can get over a lot of barriers, but if it doesn't actually happen on the roadways, the biggest barrier to riding is obviously the danger that people feel from traffic. Whether that danger is real or not, I mean, I do think that it is real, but if people feel dangerous or vulnerable on the roads, they're not going to ride. Whether it's real danger or perceived danger, we have to tackle that. And then, of course, there's the 33% who are no way, no how, totally fine. I'm not going to proselytize and make it an all or nothing. And also, I'm a believer that you can ride sometimes, take the train sometimes. If you got a car, you can drive sometimes, but you should be able to have that option available to you at all times. It should be convenient and safe to ride a bike. It should be affordable and safe to ride transit and convenient to ride transit. And the same for driving as well and walking. So given the mode of choice, you should have that freedom of mobility. All right. So let's look at who we are encouraging to ride. This kind of maps up with our 4 types of riders. This kind of dives a little bit deeper into the tier system. You know, I've heard some that it's 8 to 80 who we're trying to attract, but honestly, you should definitely ride even if you're older than 80. And, you know, we're seeing kids out there today on open streets, taking the training wheels off and really learning to ride for the first time. So, you know, even though I'll ride in whatever condition, because when I first started riding in Boston, we didn't even have a single bike lane, let alone a cycle track. You know, I cut my teeth in some pretty hairy situations that I don't wish upon anybody. So my goal is to get to the lowest stress level to feel confident riding. And if we're really going to achieve our Safe Routes to Schools goals, we need to make it so that school-age children actually have safe routes to ride. I realize I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but I'm just kind of putting this into perspective. And this kind of matches with what Anne was saying with the hyper-specific of this bike infrastructure versus this bike light versus this bike rack. The goal, of course, is to make riding as low stress as possible. All right, please, Alicia.
Wait a second. There we go.
Great. All right, so let's dive a little deeper into the school system. I'm incredibly impressed and grateful to the work that the Safe Routes to Schools Committee has done in Newton. And I know you have a task force. I know that you have a very active community. And I realize that everything in the schools right now is up in a tizzy, so I think we'll get back going soon. But just look at these 2 pictures. And one of these pictures is from Newton. It's the bike picture. The other picture is just generally what we see in most American schools. Dina had a really good point that when we come back to schools, we're going to expect a lot of people to be driven to schools, and this picture on the right to actually be the old normal back again. We can't stand for this. We really have to plan to build an infrastructure network that allows the kids who are riding the bikes on the left to make it to school safely. Planning now, or even, you know, months ago for the fall season, or even next spring is incredibly important. We need to be looking at the network so that the Safe Routes to Schools are actually safe. What type of congestion is okay with you? I'm okay with bike congestion. I'm okay having to go a little slower on a cycle track because I know that it brings more riders out. All right, please, Alicia, thank you. And then you got to look at what type of infrastructure we're really asking for out there. So this is an example of a temporary protected bike lane on the bottom, and the top is the bike lanes that we're generally given. We have some bike lanes in Newton. Most of them are door zone bike lanes. It's really not going to get school-age children riding if they're wedged in between opening doors and moving traffic. In the past, and I've been on this ride since the very beginning, I advocated when I was a student at Boston University to get that first bike lane in the city of Boston. And we got it from the BU Bridge to Kenmore Square. It was a door zone bike lane. It was a single white line. That's all we got, but darn it, we fought hard, and that was the first step. That was our foothold. The conversation has progressed so much since that 11 years ago. What we are seeing now is that it is not just for people like me who are confident, who are physically able to actually handle the traffic. We need to be making our infrastructure as low stress as possible. And the bottom example is just a very, very simple way of doing so. A couple of cones, some low cost, high vis plastic infrastructure goes a heck of a long way. If you can put that down at an intersection when you're repaving, you could easily put that down at an intersection to make a protected bike lane. It really is protected bike lane, protected, protected, protected. All right, please, Alicia, thank you. We have varieties of bicycle infrastructure. And of course, because it's evolving conversation, for those of you who are a little unfamiliar with some of the stuff you're seeing out there, this may be rote and this might be redundant, but just to mention, there are different pros and cons for each. The top left, of course, is a share-o. It just means share the road. It doesn't really do anything besides remind the drivers that bicyclists will be in the center of the lane. But obviously, once you go past that share, you can see there's not even really another one in that photograph. So it's not really doing that much even for the messaging. It also is a subtle, subconscious way of reminding the bicyclists to be a little bit further out from parked cars. The top right is downtown Boston. It's a general bike lane that actually has a little bit of a buffer between the parked cars and the bike lane. I call it a puffer as opposed to a buffer because it's just a paint buffer. It's just a little bit of a puffed up bike lane, but it does do a good amount to keep the biker out of the door zone. But you can see that it doesn't do anything to keep that taxi cab out of the lane. It doesn't do anything to keep the buses that need to pull in or the trolley tour guides from pulling in. So it actually doesn't provide any physical separation. I would not want a school-aged child to ride on that bike lane. The bottom right, which is parking protected, that's a low cost implementation. If there's enough room on a street, you can actually switch the positioning of the bike lane versus the parked cars. So you could take that top right photograph and just flip where it is. It's a little challenging if the pavement is bad because it doesn't really provide the opportunity for the bicyclists to maneuver out of the bike lane. But we're seeing cities move that route as they go full protected bike lane, which is the bottom left, which is the city of Cambridge there. That's Vassar Street by MIT, which was one of the first of the innovative sidewalk level protected, fully separated bike lanes there. And I'll talk about the city of Cambridge in a second, just as my example. But I want you to know that on one route to school, bicyclists will go through the variety of all these bike infrastructures, including more that I'm not having in there. So it's actually kind of confusing. The one thing I would encourage us to think about is standardization with our network so that a bicyclist has continuity with what they're riding in. All right, please, Alicia, thanks. All right, I'm gonna talk about the city of Cambridge for just a few slides. Forgive me, I'm not trying to talk about the Joneses or say that the grass is greener over there. I'm just using them because they've actually manifested their data incredibly well in visual format. So props to the city of Cambridge data team for allowing me to have these slides. What the city has done is they've actually stress rated all of their infrastructure. And of course, stress level depends on time of day or weather or traffic or a whole variety of other reasons. But these are meant to be, again, food for thought of how I want you to think about the city of Newton. I could have overlaid this with the Strava heat map for Newton, and you'll see where cyclists are riding. Typically, they're riding on the highest stress streets because those are the arterials, and we haven't done a good job of actually building in signage, wayfinding, or a network that would pull them off of the stressful streets. But the beauty of what Cambridge has done is they've actually then isolated out the levels of stress, and we could go through what 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 look like in a map. All right, one more, please. So I've taken these stress levels and I've just put the existing bicycle network, and this is, I believe, from 2014, so it's outdated, of course. City of Cambridge has done leaps and bounds in adding miles every year. But what you can see, and my point of this slide is that off-street protected infrastructure is very sparse and is disconnected. If you were trying to go through the city, you would not actually be able to meet your destination, or you wouldn't even really be able to leave your neighborhood if you're living in the city on a protected infrastructure. So we need to really emphasize where the gaps are, not just where the successes are. All right, one more, please. So I've taken the protected bike infrastructure and the low stress levels of 1 and 2 to show that you start to get some infill. For those of you familiar with the city of Cambridge, you'll see that the arterials and the heavy traffic streets don't show up here. 1, because they're the stressful ones, but 2, it's kind of counterintuitive because that's where the bike infrastructure actually is. Most bike lanes in the city are where most people are, which it happens to be bus routes, business districts, truck routes. So those are the stressful ones, which is where you get the opening of doors, the Uber drop-offs and pickups, and really where the density does create stress levels. But what I want you to focus on here is the infill, and that's where we can really focus our slow streets. So if I were to take that slow street image of just a couple of cones up at the start of a block, you can really start to really fill out and flesh out some meat on the bones of a skeleton of a network. And again, I'm not using Newton here just because these maps were handy to me, but I want you to think of this visually and conceivably of how this would work for your city. How would you rate the stress level of all of your streets from 1 to 5? And then when you look at 1 and 2 stress levels, that's your target for your safe routes. How can you then build a network of low cost almost immediately to really start to look at it? And then how then, as we emerge from COVID, can you make them a little bit more permanent in the conversation? All right. So I'm going to leave you with this slide of who we are building the future for. And I don't mean the future in 20, 30, 40 years. I mean the future of the fall. Arguably, this photograph is from Lawrence. This was when a ciclovia where we did an open streets day. This is Jasmine. Jasmine learned how to ride a 2-wheeler for the first time. Yes, the bike is too small for her. Yes, she's not wearing a helmet, but look at that beaming smile. Look at that confidence. Look at the empowerment that Jasmine feels here. If we're going to get somebody like Jasmine to ride to school, it's not going to be on the slides that Dina showed us of Washington Street or the streets right outside the school. It's going to be on the quiet neighborhood roads. And we really do need to figure out the infill of what's going on in Newton with the destinations, with those who are most impacted with this virus, which are, again, the elderly community and the school-age children for the most part, and really focus on making it so it's for them, not for people like me. The Strava heat map is great if I'm a hardcore cyclist, as Anne says, but I'm going to argue that we don't really want to care so much about them at the offset. We want to care about Jasmine, and we want to care about getting school-age kids to ride. So keep her image in your minds when you're thinking about where can we go for the next steps. And I think that might be it. I think I have my contact info on a final slide. I'm going to ask that I keep in touch with you. Yeah, so sorry, my name is so tiny there. That's my email. I'm always available to you. Check out pleasemassbike.org. We are a membership organization. If you're a Mass Bike member, I'm incredibly grateful to you. We have a very strong and robust membership in Newton. We have a great partnership with Bike Newton. I work great with Alicia and a lot of your city councilors. I've been at this game for a while, and I'm appreciative of the leaps and bounds that we're seeing in the city, not just in the implementation, but now in that forward progressive conversation. So with that, I will turn the microphone back over, and I'm again grateful and thankful that we're able to have this conversation now.
Awesome. All right. So I'm doing a little time check. It's 8:23. So we do have a little time for questions. I'm going to put Jasmine, you said her name was, picture back up because that's just a great image. I really got my start in advocacy thinking about how I could make it possible for my kids to walk and bike to school. So I think if we keep people like Jasmine in mind and maybe Jasmine's grandmother in mind, those are two people, if we keep those people in mind, will serve us well. Thank you so much, Anne and Dina and Galen, for your presentations. We do have some questions that were submitted to us ahead of time, and we have a few questions that have come in on the chat box. So if there are other people who have questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A, and if we don't get to them tonight, I will ensure that you get an answer when we're done, after we're done. All right, so one of the questions that came in, so about schools and making it easier for student transportation. Um, so some suggestions on strategies to make it safer as you get closer to school. So do you think that it's a good idea to think about things like widening sidewalks near the school? So similar to what was done in Brookline, so close to school so that there's just more space for kids to walk and to bike. Should we be considering things like closing the streets around the schools so that so that if the parents are going to drive, they just simply can't get close enough? So we'd love a little, and then love to talk a little bit about what do you think we would need to be successful to get bike trains going, including training and organizing and sort of all of that, and what kind of resources that maybe even Mass Bike can lend to us. So there's 3 questions. I don't know, maybe Anne, you might want to take the widening and the closing of streets, I don't know. And then Galen, if you could talk just a little bit about bike trains.
And for the engagement around the schools, it's really key for the parents to engage with the principal. Because in some of the schools that I studied in Arlington, the principals didn't want the students to ride their bikes to school and have the bikes parked around the school. So parents work with the principals. Parents map the routes, parents map the streets, and together they decide if they want to close some streets, they want to create cycle tracks on others.
Okay.
Not had enough children biking to school. Safe routes to school in the US has been primarily walking to school.
Right.
It benefits so much more if they could bike. So yes, but again, the decisions are up to the principal and all the parents who live around that school, including the residents who don't have kids, because I'd even propose having a safe routes to school stencil on the sidewalk, which raises your property values because you show that you're part of the school system and your walk is safe.
That's it. So Galen, what would it take for us to get bike trains going?
Awesome. I'll just echo, I agree with Anne about the principal. I always think of the principals of the schools as almost the de facto property managers. So if you're ever going to close down a street or narrow a lane or change the direction of a school, the principal can do that. So start with the principal. And I will say, though Arlington used to not even allow students to ride, we've changed that in Arlington. The principals have come around. So
Yep.
I'm also encouraging us to keep at it. And though we have adversity, we're seeing leaps and bounds in our games here. What does it take to get a bike train? Well, you need a really engaged parent who is like on top of their game, charismatic and very patient. You'll need a few helper parents, and you'll need to work with the schools to make sure that this is sanctioned. So again, a principal and a few point people at the schools. And my real advice is to point you to the task force, because I know that you've got a Safe Routes to Schools, a very strong Safe Routes to Schools presence in Newton. You've got like designated coordinators who are working with the school system. Alicia, that's how you and I first met. I think you were at the State House receiving an award from the Secretary of Transportation of all the great work at Safe Routes to Schools. So,
Thank you.
But you did that as a parent, right? So it really is the champions that you have to identify. And now you're a city councilor. So there's upward mobility, I think.
There is. So, but I just maybe get back to specifics. We need to train, we need to make sure kids have the right skill set to be riding, right?
Yeah.
You need to organize the routes.
Mm-hmm.
You need to practice. I mean, some basics. Is there, that's actually something maybe, offline we should be working on, like a how-to manual for it. And it's probably different at a high school level than it is at an elementary level. I mean, I'm really hoping we can roll this out at a high school or even middle school level where parents aren't really involved beyond maybe the initial, like, confirming the routes and whatever. But
yeah, that's great. I think at a high school or even a middle school level, you don't even need to train. You don't really need groups. I think it's more on the elementary school level that you want like kids in packs so that, safety in numbers for visibility and parental guidance. I think once they get to maybe like freshman or even sophomore year, kids can ride bikes wherever they want. I would assume.
I was going for maybe an accountability, like, you're going to meet your friends. Like,
yeah. Well,
I don't know.
Kids are probably doing that already, but I will say that there's a lot of resources that Newton has with the Safe Routes to Schools Task Force. So starting there is really important. In terms of actual classroom or on bike training, Mass Bike does deliver Safe Routes to Schools on bike training and bike rodeos. And if the town goes even further, we can, which we've done in the past, we've done classes outside of the formal school environment to teach good riding habits. We've worked with Landry's Bicycles, for instance, to run classes as well. One of my passions is bike education in all forms. So there's an endless, rabbit hole to go down of that. And the answer is yes, I'm engaged. Let's do it.
Excellent. All right, so skip that one. There was a question about lighting and
Yes,
the best lighting. I know, Ann, you had talked about lighting, just about street lights and how they impact a cyclist ability. I think that was the question.
Yeah.
Their ability to see whether it's too bright or too, so do you have an example of maybe who's doing it great, who's doing it really well?
That's the study that I'm now preparing to submit to NSF with
Okay.
Partners Lamb Lighting in Cambridge, because we haven't really designed lighting with LED lights, the new colored range that we have. So
Yeah.
we want to have sky lighting. We don't want to have the glare. We don't want to have the glare from the asphalt. We don't want to have the glare from headlights. We want to be able to light up the whole cycle track and even flatter the face of the approaching bicyclist. So we know who's coming at us and they all look healthy and young, not green and ghoulish or yellow. So yes, there are lots of factors that go into lighting, and that's what we're going to study. So we light cycle tracks, which we haven't done in the past.
Excellent. All right, so there's also a question around electrified mobility and
Yes.
how, that's a game changer. And do you have any insight, any thoughts on, we've seen a lot of e-bike sales going way up, right?
E-bike sales are going to go through the roof because people are now buying bikes. They're sold out, can't keep up with the demand. And after a person rides an e-bike, they're going to realize that the biking is it involves less stress for them, with less perspiration, easier to get to work. They will have engaged in a little bit less physical activity, not based on the calorie burning while they're on the bike, but because it takes them less time to ride the bike.
Yeah.
And they can get up hills, they can get to work faster. We'll see e-bikes for sale because some of them are also very affordable. You can take the e-bike battery out, charge it in your house, charge it in your office, put it on the bike.
So we had a great question from our friend Nathan Phillips. He wanted to know if you could see, so in Milan, there's a program where they're paying people to bike. And I think the Netherlands is doing that as well, right? So is that something that you could ever see our United States, Massachusetts, Newton, like paying people to get on their bike to go?
I think we were lucky to get 1,200 per person out of the COVID stimulus money. I'm fearful that there are too many people who don't like bicyclists still because it's so car centric. Up till COVID, we still had a real hard time to get cycle traffic in the Boston area. We had to wait until a bicyclist was killed and then finally we get one. So we're not Italy. I've studied so much about the Italians and the routes and the rides and the races there. I just don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, I'll kind of chime in there too, Nathan. That's something that's been on my radar as well. I've actually brought this up to Rep. Presley and Senator Markey directly because I think it's a federal conversation. It's probably a tax rebate conversation more than anything else. Rep. Presley did put forth the Bicycle Commuter Act of 2019, which would facilitate employers being able to, which used to happen, employers could give $20 per month for somebody who is commuting to work pre-tax, and it goes straight into repairs or buying and purchasing of a bicycle. That was supposed to be up to $76 per month, and then specifically be allowed to purchase e-bikes and go towards bike share memberships. It didn't make it through for various reasons. Not a lot is happening in Congress, but the Bicycle Commuter Act of 2019 is something to pay attention to. And I will say that Rep. Presley, which is just to the east of Newton with her district, she is on the Bicycle Caucus. So even though she doesn't ride, she's a huge champion of it too. So I think it's a federal conversation more than anything else. And so I'm still pursuing it from my position at Mass Bike to see if this could actually be included in the stimulus packages, specifically for public transit money to go towards bike share passes. which is also something that's being kicked around, is to utilize CARES funding, or COVID funding, I should say, to make transit free. So I'm hoping that bike sharing could also be included in that. So I think with Anne, like, I'm not hopeful, but we're still asking.
Keep asking, keep asking. Yeah, and I think along with that, something I own an e-bike, but I wonder if we would have even more people on e-bikes if you could qualify for a rebate like you do for an e-car.
Yes,
someone
and
that affords it.
now we're fearful the EV cars rebate won't remain, but it was only $2,500 if you were buying a Prius, $2,500 if you were buying a regular EV, and that's not a lot of money off of the cost.
Correct.
And then you've still got to install your EV charger, which costs money. You've got to have a driveway for it, so it's long. And as far as the rebate on buying an electric bike, have we given that to low-income people first? Have we given them the secure bike parking so that they can have a place where their bike is not going to be stolen? So I would like to give out bikes. I would like to give out bikes for free, or as Bikes Not Bombs does, you've got to earn your bike. It's not just a handout. How do we I think we get more people on bikes if we give them a wide cycle track. That's my one single logic. Give them a wide cycle track and give them amenities along the route, and the desire will be there because we provided them the easy way and the safe way to bike. And socially, they all want to do it.
All right, so question for you, Dina. So someone is asking, do you think it's students or their parents who are more concerned about biking to school, so safety-wise? And what kind of training about road rules do you think would be necessary to get kids up and running?
I think it's both students and parents who are worried about, concerned about biking to school. I know that I think some parents won't let their students bike to school. Other times it's the students themselves who don't feel comfortable. And I think in terms of what types of training and learning, I think a lot of students just don't know what before they take driver's ed, especially underclassmen don't really know what the rules of the road are. So just some sort of basic overview of how bikes fit in with vehicles, and just basic hand signals, and how you should approach, maybe also some tips and tricks, how do you approach a left turn when you're biking, how to take the lane, and just little I guess insider tips about how to make biking just a little more safe, or how you can be more in control while you're biking on the road. Alicia, I think you're muted.
Thank you. I did mute myself because my son was pounding up the stairs. I didn't think you guys would hear that. So that said, I wonder, Galen, if you think that it's going to be possible for us to do bike safety training and maintain social distancing. So how does that play?
Galen's muted. Oh, there he is. Okay.
Oh, he is now. So how do you think that could play in? Do you think that
wait and
that would be
see?
possible?
Yeah, I mean, so I will say we're piloting some virtual content. We're working with our Safe Routes to Schools partners to see if we could do some live classroom stuff. Safe Routes does have some pre-recorded, what to phrase it as, almost like diagrams of some of the lessons, which obviously is not nearly as robust as if it were in person and on bike, but there is some guidance that could be done virtually. So we're seeing the best that we can kind of take place through virtual lessons. And it's something that Mass Bike is taking very seriously, that we have yet to really roll out, but we're hoping to get on our website kind of the best videos that we've seen, not recreating the wheel, but of the basics of how to ride, how to think of yourself in traffic, how to do hand signals, and all the very basics there, which is going to be a little tough because the best bike instruction happens in real time. And then, I'm hopeful that as we start to ease out of this, folks with face coverings in groups of less than 10, can go out, and, the best bike lessons happen in groups of 8. So maybe we just keep it in small groups and just be a little bit more intentional about distancing and making sure that we're doing the appropriate physical and sanitizing and all of that. I mean, it's protocols will have to change, but I think the content still matters, and that won't really have to change. So I think, you know, we're just barely entering phase 1 of this pulling out.
Right.
So my hope is just we're gonna have something, and we're gonna try it and do it better as we make this
So
up and build this
super,
airplane as we fly it.
super excited about the virtual content. We actually had a question about that. It was really directed to Ellen, like, can you get virtual content and for bike safety distributed through the library? So maybe Newton Free Library would be a good way to get some of that out there.
Yeah.
There also was a question, since we're talking about face masks, about when cyclists should wear face masks, and maybe what a good face mask for a bicyclist is. I'm not sure. It was one of those two questions. So they're both good questions to answer.
Yeah.
Your advice on face masks.
I call them coverings and not so much masks, because I think that's kind of where we're at right now. And masks imply that, like, you know, something more robust that you have to pay for. And,
yeah,
you know, Vivian Ortiz actually is very good about reminding us it's like, it could just be a t-shirt, just pull it up and tie it around. And so, you know, we're offering our mask bike buffs that I kind of showed in my first photograph that are, I feel, effective enough if you're going to be out cycling.
Right.
I've been keeping an eye on the science, and I'm not really convinced that it's too prevalent of people to get airborne, enough of a virus load that way, but I'm definitely not a scientist. I'm definitely not a researcher. So I'm obviously following the guidance of the CDC,
Right.
but the governor says, wear a face covering. I'm wearing a face covering, which means, you know, maybe I'm not pedaling as hard, or I'm not riding in groups. No more Boston Bike Party for a while. So, you know, you will have to change how you approach riding, but yes, face coverings, please. Yes.
Yes.
But it could be a light buff, or just a light t-shirt or something like that.
Yeah. Bandana.
I can add that I'm one of the people who's sewn the face coverings, given them out to neighbors, given them to my grandchildren, different sizes for them, given to my adult children. I also happen to have an old N95 that I used for construction on this 200-year-old cottage that I used because I was taking out lead paint and horsehair plaster. I couldn't donate to the hospital. So I have probably 4 face masks, and I vary wearing them depending upon my exposure and my need to breathe. The N95 is quite suffocating, especially if it's getting hot out. It's really not great to wear, but if I'm around a lot of people, I wear that one. If I'm gardening, but I'm gardening, just today I was gardening my neighbor's yard because she's not there. So I was taking out the weeds because it was a nice day, but I just put on the regular surgical mask with the loops over the ears because that one's really loose and easy to breathe in. But I know if I exhale, then I'm not dispelling the droplets. So I have 4 masks, and I vary them based on need.
All right, so just cognizant of time, it's 8:42. So even though we don't have to get, normally in the library, you'd be moving out right now so the custodian can clean up. It's been a really amazing conversation, really great presentations. And we do have some thoughts for some follow-up, sort of next steps on this. I think digging in a little bit more on your phases, you know, Galen, I love the way you've laid that out. We in Newton are really thinking about what's going to happen next with the restaurants, and we do need to think about how that's going to play together with the biking, you know, bike infrastructure and otherwise. So stay tuned. We will have you know, more information on, you know, next steps, but I definitely feel like, you know, a piece around how it all comes together. Again, this will be available on the Green Newton website. I don't know how long, maybe in the next day or two. But if you have any questions, you can reach out to Green Newton. And I really appreciate everyone who's able to come. And I do understand maybe 1 or 2 people had some problems getting in, or maybe more. I don't know what the issue was. But this will be available to share with people. And there are many, you know, Bike Newton is a great organization, and they're happy to take more questions around biking. I'm happy to, both Andrea Downs, Councilor Downs, and I are on this call. abowman@newtonma.org or adowns@newtonma.org, .gov, sorry, .gov, abowman@newtonma.gov. Drop us an email if you have questions about questions or comments, things you'd like to see happening. And as well as Galen, thank you again. Especially thank you to Dina for her very first, web forum. You did a fabulous job. You really did. Super great. And yeah, so thank you, everybody. And I think, let me see if nicely done. We got a nicely done from Jim Purdy. And thank you very much. I hope everybody stays safe. Get out and do some biking, and hope to see you in person, on the road sometime soon, if not here in a webinar. So thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Great. Thanks, everyone.